Hello there. Hi, Marilyn. Hi, Vinika. So lovely to have you both. Today's session, we are going to be talking about managing diversity in distributed teams. And I have two incredible women who are joining me today. The topic is really important to us, and we talk a lot about it here at Cosmic Centaurs. According to some of the research we know by Mckinsey that was conducted in 2019, companies in the top quartile for ethnic and cultural diversity were 36% more profitable than companies in the fourth quartile. And in the late 2000s, the CIA actually conducted a research project with Harvard University called the Project Looking Glass. They found that teams with more women, in fact, outperformed male-dominated ones. We've all been told that diverse teams have better outcomes, but what does diversity really mean? When talking about diversity, we're often implicitly referring to people's phenotypes, so their ethnicity, their gender, their age, but we should also be considering the cultural, cognitive diversity, which refers to having employees with different thinking styles, habits, and perspectives. With the rise of flexible work, companies are now able to hire and onboard from all around the world. Take us, Cosmic Centaurs, for example. We're a team of 9 living in 4 countries with 6 nationalities. We learn so much about each other's cultures and languages and cuisines. And when we come, and yet we each come with our unique perspectives to help us create and true magic together. But we know that's not just us. And a BCG study found that companies with more diverse management teams actually had 19% higher revenues due to innovation. This is just a glimpse of some of the outcomes of diversity. And today we're talking to 2 incredible guests about managing diversity, compassion, leadership, and everything in between. So I'd love to introduce you to our first speaker. Dr. Vinika Rao is joining us today. Vinika is the Executive Director of the INSEAD Gender Initiative and Emerging Markets Institution. She's also the Director of the Hoffman Global Institute for Business and Society in Asia. Prior to INSEAD, she was an associate professor of strategy at the SP Jain Center of Management in Singapore, and her research interests are around gender diversity in corporate leadership, male allyship, and multi-generational influences in the workplace. She's a frequent speaker on the related topics and has been published and quoted in leading business publications from around the world. Ziad Rahal from LinkedIn, a fan favorite from Center Stage, was unfortunately unable to join us today, but he is with us in spirit, so much so that Marilyn is channeling his energy and aura with the plants behind her, which, if you know Ziad, is a trademark of some of the online videos that he speaks at. So he's really irreplaceable, but he's with us in spirit, and we're sending him our well wishes. And just like all teams, we have a set of players on the bench. So today we have Marilyn, who's going to be joining and sharing her insights as a panelist. Marilyn, as you may know, is the CEO and founder of Cosmic Centaurs. She has experience in leading organizations of all sizes and knows how to bring the agility of small startups to big corporations. She was previously the CMO at Ahmad and also the head of Dubai Opera. She got her MBA from INSEAD and spent 10 years in the startup world building and running digital native companies. She's also a podcast host. She is the co-host of Who Run the World, a podcast that she co-hosts with Rhea, all about what it means to be an Arab woman and that identity. Thank you both for joining me today.
I would say thank you for having me. But really, I'm really happy that Dr. Vinika, that you joined us today.
Absolutely,
it's lovely to be here, and Marilyn is one of our own, from the INSEAD family. So especially happy to be here with you both.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I guess, Dr. Vinika, I'd like to start with you. There's a data point that we refer to, and we know that 70% of companies believe they're effective at attracting and retaining diverse employees, but only 11% actually understand what that diversity actually is. And this is according to Josh Burson. I'd love to hear from you. How would you define true diversity within a team or organization?
Thank you, Tala. That's a great opening question and something that I can speak about for a very long time, but I will try and restrict myself to the main points. And you're absolutely right. As you said in your sort of opening remarks, there's been a lot of research on the impact of diversity on business performance. Both academic research and experience from practitioners has established the business case for diversity pretty much. And so we do see, companies making all the right noises, whether it comes to, having just rules systems for targets, etc., for diversity when they're hiring, metrics for performance measurement in terms of diversity. Many companies have offices, they have diversity officers, DEI officers, etc. So, the correct noises are being made. A lot of companies are doing some very great things in that regard. But as you mentioned, building a culture of true diversity is difficult. It's difficult at the best of times. And in a crisis situation like the sort that we've gone through now, that's actually been a great test of, where true diversity really exists in an organization. And I say this from experience. We were recently doing some research at the INSEAD Gender Initiative, which involved conversations with various CEOs. And one of the questions that we asked them was about, given that all the chaos that's happening in companies and, the fact, and this was early in the pandemic, with everything that's sort of going wrong as you're struggling pretty much for lives and livelihoods, where has that left your diversity measures? And as we had expected, there were business leaders who said that, I'm just trying to focus on survival right now. And so this is not really on the top of my mind, which was understandable in many cases. But I was heartened to find that we did have business leaders who said that now more than ever, it's very important for us to stick with our everything that we've set in place for diversity. And the reason for that, according to them, and this actually we published an article in the Business Times here in Singapore, and I quoted some of them, where they basically said that the reason for doing this is because we've realized that a crisis like the pandemic can actually set us back many years, because we've seen the statistics that you spoke about have become much worse when it comes to gender balance, for instance, right, through the pandemic. And so that's sort of the reason why these companies where diversity is truly a part of their DNA, then it's one of those things which is non-negotiable. It is there irrespective of the situation that they're facing. It is something that they adhere to at all levels of the organization, especially in the more senior levels where decision making happens. It becomes even more important. And that's something that I think is very important. Another thing to mention in this regard is, we're not talking about token diversity, right? When we speak about true diversity, it's not about having one woman on your board and that's enough, because we know that doesn't work, right? I think I'm preaching to the choir. You guys all know it. I'm sure a lot of our audience will agree that, that doesn't go very far. We have to have a certain minimum representation of every group that we're trying to represent in order to make sure that their voices are impactful and can properly be heard. The other dimension here to mention is what you referred to, Tala, in your opening, it's called different things. It can, we talk about cognitive diversity in addition to phenotype. We talk about, some people will refer to it as inherent diversity, which we're born with when we're talking about ethnicity, race, gender, sexual preference, etc., age. And then there's the acquired diversity, which is to do with experience and background, and sort of that influences the kind of thought leadership that you provide to an organization. And that is often obviously can be more difficult to measure. So that's important to take that into account when we talk about whether diversity has truly been achieved in an organization or not. And it always helps, if I may take another minute to just emphasize my point, for instance, to give some examples. So I've had conversations with male managers who've said that it made a huge difference to them after they'd had one female boss to just understand how things can be different and better. Or if they've managed a team that has had lots of women. And of course, if it's a gentleman who has a working female spouse or partner, that has a huge impact. It also matters in the case of a woman who has, perhaps had the opportunity to work in many different countries. So then your cultural sensitivity is different, your awareness is different. And so the kind of leadership that you bring in as a woman also changes, right? So the acquired aspect is something that we must not ignore. And that can be something that we really want to keep track of. And the final piece of the puzzle is, the whole thing about being asked to dance once you're at the party, etc., is about, building that culture of creating a safe space where everyone, irrespective of their inherent or acquired backgrounds, feels safe in bringing up a point of view which might be different from that of the other people in the group. And where they feel that, their feedback, they will receive feedback, and the feedback will be actionable. It will be based on performance-oriented measures as opposed to anything personal. And the sort of the sentiment with which they bring in something that's innovative or different will also be reciprocated in the way that reactions come in. So creating that safe space is another crucial element. And I think if we can sort of combine all of these dimensions together, then we're approaching the kind of diversity that we'd like to see in organizations.
Absolutely. Yeah. So much of what you said resonated with me, and I'm sure with Marilyn as well. I'd love to ask her to kind of share her reactions to what you said, but also to note that this concept of acquired diversity is just so fascinating. Marilyn, I'd love to hear kind of your reactions to Vinika's response. And also, I'd love to hear maybe if you have any examples from your experience about how you see this working in the different teams that you've led, and how, if you have any examples of how diversity enabled your team to thrive.
Yeah, I mean, as someone with more acquired diversity than real diversity, I really appreciate that argument. Just by way of a quick joke, my husband and I are both Lebanese, but we always joke that I am very Lebanese, but I don't look Lebanese, and vice versa. He grew up in London, and so he looks very Lebanese, but isn't, to the point where I got a DNA test to kind of be able to have a conversation with data. And I thought, I'd be quite exotic. It turned out I'm like 97% from the Levant or something. And I was like, oh, I'm really very local. But I am someone with a lot of acquired diversity in the sense of my experience where I've grown up. As Tala was mentioning earlier, I've done everything from, building tech products to running an opera and a lot of things in the middle. And therefore, I am biased to want to celebrate diversity because I am the product of that diversity as well. I always talk about on a kind of a personal experience of why I find diversity to be such an important thing. I always refer to a book that I really like, which is called Range, which argues that generalists will triumph in a very specialized world. And in that book, David Epstein, who wrote it, he separates between kind problems and wicked problems, right? So kind problems are problems that are dealt with in a known environment with known variables. Something you could say like playing a chess game, you know what the rules are, you know how many pieces you have and how you can move them. Wicked problems, on the other hand, are problems that are in unexpected contexts. And I think, yes, the pandemic has been one of those, but businesses are constantly evolving in unexpected contexts. And so from the point of view of, let's say, like the manager practitioner in me, I think that, first of all, having a team of diverse thinkers makes a business more ready to solve these complex problems. Whether in my first company at Keyword or here at Cosmic Centaurs, I've always been surrounded by people who don't do what they do. I'm an architect who is, advises people on organizational strategy. Tala, you're someone from PR who's a consultant here. At Keyword, I used to work with engineers and accountants who had become creative directors. And I just think that there is so much creativity and excellence to be brought in from other environments. And in the book that I was referencing, David Epstein shares so many anecdotes about how, for example, NASA wanted to solve a problem about the positioning of solar panels on their station, and they put it out to the crowd, and every single solution that was suggested by the crowd was more efficient than the solution of the NASA scientists themselves. So there are so many beautiful anecdotes. And here in Cosmic Centaurs, on the topic of representation, and then I'll hand it back, but that really resonated with me. We're a team of all girls until 2 days ago, right? And I was joking with the first person I was hiring, and I'm like, how are you going to be around like we're just women? And they said to me, oh, I grew up with my mother and 3 sisters. I'm like, great, you'll fit right in. But now we actually have 2 more men joining us, and so there's going to be representation of the male side of our team. And I wonder, I'm really very curious to see and explore how this is going to change our dynamics for the better and what we're going to learn from each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're going to learn a lot from each other, that's for sure, and learning how we as a team grow, and as our team grows, what we're learning all together. So that's it'll be really fascinating. Vinika, I know that some of your work is around the topic of multi-generational diversity. Can you please share your thoughts on this and how it's managed within teams and at organizations?
Sure. And, again, that's something that, as you know, Tala, I'm very interested in. And the reason is, I think, it's the first time in human history, really, that we have so many generations working together. right? I mean, just even if I think till a few years back, we used to talk about millennials and all the issues that came with having millennials in the workplace, etc. And a lot of my, sort of clients and people I work with in HR will say, just as soon as we sort of gotten used to the millennials, now we have Gen Z that is again making us turn everything right on its head. And it's true. And, and the age of sort of incoming entrance into the workplace is becoming younger and younger because they don't have to come in formal contracts. Many of them are working even as they're studying. And it's becoming quite young on the one hand because they're experts at things that, I know nothing about. When it comes to the tech space, for instance, my 12-year-old or a 20-year-old can tell us more than I can. And so they become very valuable. On the other hand of the spectrum, of course, the older workers getting older just because lifespan has improved, people are retiring later, they're very productive and very, very useful. So the positive, the huge good news is that, all of that diversity in terms of age and experience is wonderful, very useful in the workplace, and companies, are seeing the benefit of that. Having said that, of course, there are challenges, in working with so many very different people who had very different experiences. I mean, some of the experiences that, those of us who were born before digitalization happened, these are experiences that are completely, different from what a lot of people in the workplace today experience. I mean, to a digital native, the idea of some of these things is impossible, right? So those things become important. And so, yes, I do think it's important to manage that. And, we've done some research at the Emerging Markets Institute at INSEAD, where we looked at people from across the world and different generations. And I had some very interesting ideas. But just to sort of give you a quick response in terms of some of the things some rules that help, some things that work, especially in terms of, I think, managing older workers. I remember in a previous conversation, I think with Marilyn, we had discussed the idea that, it's difficult for older workers because perhaps they're not used to technology. So in the remote sort of environment that we're working in right now, with flexibility increasing, does it become more difficult? And I've actually found that if everyone treats everybody else with mutual respect, and an awareness that just because, someone doesn't know how to put a background on this call, as happened with me just before, that doesn't negate all the other experiences that person might have had, right? And on the other hand, when a younger person is correcting us in some respect, then again, that feedback has to be taken with a lot of respect. And I find that simple rule works really well. The idea of reverse mentoring, which a lot of organizations are following now. I remember, I think it was the CEO of Unilever in one of the countries that we work with, who talked about the fact that, he has sort of a mentor who's 21 years old. And this person is sort of teaching him something new every day. But of course, the mentor is delighted to have the opportunity to be talking to this extremely experienced and, wonderful person from whom he's going to learn many things that are very important for his career. So I think this whole thing of sort of a mutual respect works very well. And of course, the pandemic has helped in many ways because it's forced us to adopt a lot of things, even in terms of technology. Those of us who were sort of, still trying to sort of stay away from some maybe remote working, or maybe not completely accepting of productivity and how that is impacted by remote working. There was no choice and it happened. I think it's also forced companies to look at how they can better equip their employees across ages, whether it's in terms of maybe providing younger employees with physical hardware at home, which they may not be able to afford, and perhaps older employees with some training so that they're able to sort of, circumvent some of these issues, which they may not have had to face under normal circumstances. So I think that has been one of the positives that has come out of this, and it might have actually helped increase the productivity and sort of the positives that come from age-based diversity in the workplace.
Thank you so much for sharing. Really, it's such a simple concept, this idea of mutual respect just being the baseline that, that determines how we engage with each other is so important to remember. In thinking of some of the positives, I'd also like to kind of switch gears and talk a little bit about the challenges. Marilyn, this question is specifically for you. We know that with flexible work, organizations are no longer bound to hiring talent from a specific geographical region, right? Now we can hire and build teams with people from countries we've never visited, backgrounds we're unfamiliar with, and cultural contexts that are like very different to ours. Can you tell us a little bit about the challenges that come with this? And I also know that that's kind of one of the questions that was in the comments, so we'll answer both at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I have like a 3-dimensional answer to this. The first thing is maybe I really perceive diversity as something to celebrate and cherish. So my first reaction to diversity is not that it's a challenge, but that it's a amplification of our collective capability as a team. Now, it can sometimes be a challenge, meaning first, I might actually not treat someone as different, but in fact they are, meaning they have different needs, they want feedback in different ways. Diversity can also come from they're a morning person or an evening person. You know, we've had this conversation as a team. Half of us are one way and the other are another way. What time do we start work? You know, diversity doesn't always have to be just about like the big ones, you know, like gender or race. So I think the interesting thing is to find perhaps both points of commonalities and points of difference, and to treat both of them with curiosity. So maybe I can add to, you know, the baseline that Dr. Vinika gave us about trust, which is another one about curiosity and openness to learn. So instead of saying, you know, what our parents would have said, like, oh, you should wake up early, you know, like that good, smart, hardworking people, they get up in the morning. It's more about, what do you do at night? How do you spend your time? Like whatever the point of difference or the point of commonality is, to explore it as if you've heard this really cool fact for the first time, and as an opportunity to discover the richness of humanity. Now, there's this aspect of like me as the leader towards that other person. I think someone also in the comments said this, and it's such an amazing perspective, but it's important because sometimes as the leader, I forget that there is a point of difference, right? I assume that everybody's sitting in my head and they know exactly how I think about everyone, and it's not true. And so I also think that accepting that diversity can be a challenge for some, that it's not obvious for everybody, and that towards me or towards each other within our team, we have to have spaces for those conversations, I think might be the way that I address that as well.
Tala, may I come in on that one?
Yes, we'd love to hear your thoughts, of course.
Thank you. You know, I was thinking about this as Marilyn was speaking, and you know, to the point about we can now hire people in a multicultural space much easier. Yes, because we don't have to force them to move, etc. Absolutely agree. I mean, there are huge positives to that for all the reasons that we've discussed so far. But I do want to caution that, you know, we also have to be careful that we don't sort of oversimplify the issue sometimes, as I've unfortunately, at least anecdotally in conversations, seen, you know, just having people from various different countries doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, that whole idea of true diversity has been created. So that point, I think, just still needs to be borne in mind. Having said that, overall, I think it's very positive. You know, you will have more experiences, you will have a different sort of point of view, which is wonderful. And I think one positive also to mention, I think, with all of this has meant that, again, you know, when someone needs to sort of take on a promotion or take on a larger role, we now no longer have to force them to sort of, you know, uproot everybody, the entire family, and sort of have to move across the world just because that's what's required when you have a promotion. You know, and I think that's a huge positive, and especially so again in the context of some minority groups in many countries. You know, women do bear a sort of larger role in terms of looking after the family, etc. And so that can be something that impacts women when it comes to taking on senior leadership roles. So I did want to mention that is another sort of positive, I think, that's come out of you know, this whole ability to now be able to hire in a way that with more flexibility than we've had in the past. So just wanted to make that point.
I have a question for you. I'm going to jump right in. You know, there's something very interesting about the question of whether distributed work is favorable for minorities, particularly women. Like, if we want to deep dive into this. Interestingly enough, before the pandemic, flexible and remote work were given as solutions to help promote kind of female employment and their ability to contribute to the workforce. But when it became the norm for everybody to work remotely, we're now seeing that, if anything, it's had the opposite effect. I wonder if you could speak to that contradiction. I always find it difficult. Like 2 hours, you know, 2 years ago, it was like, oh, you want more women to contribute? Great, give them flexible time. And now it's actually, if you give them a little too much, then they can't separate and compartmentalize their personal lives and their work lives. And the number is staggering. 20% of women have dropped out of the workforce. I wonder if you could talk about this duality of that flexibility.
Yeah, so I mean, first, I think no flexibility, no measures work unless they apply to everyone. And one of the positives has been, as you were saying, you know, the fact that now it's not just women who have been working flexibly, right? So everybody has to do it. And so there have been no hidden consequences because, well, everyone's being forced to do it. And what that has done, I think, is in the most part made everybody realize, men and women, we know that it's, a lot of men don't want to go back to ever working full time again, or ever working from the office again. And this is not something that only women are saying. And also a lot of fathers, for instance, who've, have been able to more actively participate in learning from home for their children, have realized just what they were missing out on if they were not already actively engaged with that process. And so, yes, that has worked. And I've always said, even in the past, that we can have a whole lot of measures and say that we have flexibility so that we can have more women come in, but because there were always hidden issues associated with that, whether it was warranted or not, it never really worked. I remember many years back, Marilyn, where we had some of your colleagues at INSEAD who had a careers talk, and we had a consulting firm, that had come in to do a careers talk. And I remember the partner who was making the sort of presentation saying that, okay, so guys, I need to rush this up because I need to leave at this time because I'm only working till, whatever time it was, and I need to go home and, pick up my kids. And I heard sort of a collective gasp from the audience, like, he's going to go back and pick up his kids and that's it. And so he must have sensed it. So he said, yeah, I only work half a day. And I thought that was wonderful because immediately he had, he convinced the entire audience that anything that firm talks about when it comes to flexibility is true, because here you have a senior partner saying that, he's a gentleman and he does this. And so the reverse was also true when, people didn't often believe it. Coming to the point, Marilyn, about, 20% of women exiting the workforce. And we've all seen these very disturbing statistics. Tala was speaking earlier about, I think, some other reports, all of which we've read. And I think 2019, the one that stuck out in my mind from at least American statistics, I think there was 865,000 women who had left the workforce, and that was 4 times as more than men. It was, it was not all involuntary. It wasn't all that they were forced out. Many of them made that decision voluntarily. The Mckinsey report on women at work, which I think, again, a lot of us have read, spoke about the fact that 1 in 4 women, are actively considering either leaving the workforce, or if they're staying on and they don't want to take on bigger roles anymore. And equally disturbing facts, because we know how difficult it is to get women in senior leadership positions in some companies, and to have them think that, well, okay, even if I am going to stay on, I cannot take on more responsibilities because the dreaded second shift has become worse. Right? I mean, because not only do women have to guard their own careers and work extra hard because, of course, the company is going through crisis, as are we all. There's also children at home who need to be homeschooled. Schools are under lockdown in many cases. Things are looking better, but, there are parts of the world where that is still a very important problem. Elder care, and in a lot of societies, that sort of automatically falls to the woman. And so that becomes sort of a double whammy. And we have seen that, and it's continuing. Early indications were that it's likely that women will be disproportionately affected by the pandemic. And now, many reports have come out. I always look at the World Economic Forum gender gap report that comes out. And again, there, I mean, the figures are mind-boggling in terms of how long now it's going to take for gender gap to sort of resolve itself. So from all of those points of view, I agree that, the situation is quite dire. And we do have to take into consideration the fact that this pandemic has disproportionately affected women. And so we need to do something about it. We can talk about, hopefully, and we'll have a chance to talk through solutions also. I don't want to leave it on a sad note or a gloomy note. There are possibilities, there are various opportunities that we can leverage. And I'm sure Tala is going to ask us about that soon. So I will stop talking right now.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there are, and maybe first, Marilyn, I'll start with you, but then Vinika, I'd love to come back to you. I'd love to kind of, as a leader of a business and as somebody who's held many leadership roles, I'd love to know your thoughts on, is it the role of policy and business leaders to ensure that they are deliberately closing the gender gap in distributed settings in specific? And what are some of these policies that can be implemented? And, maybe after that, Vinika, I'd love to ask you about the general solutions that we can kind of put forward to offset what's happened to the staggering number of women who have been leaving the workforce.
Am I allowed to curse? The answer is hell yes. It has to be somebody's job, so it better be ours. That's the short answer. The long answer is, honestly, we can go back to the reason why organizations exist, and maybe it's not the fundamental theoretical reason that they have to create value for society, but hopefully we're past the original reasons why organizations exist, and we're able to see that in addition to economic value added, we have a role on a societal value added KPI, which was my first question to my finance professor at INSEAD. When I learned the concept of EVA, I walked up to him and I said, how do you calculate value added to society? He's like, I always have one of you. Like, there's always one person who asks me that question. I mean, how can you call yourself a leader if you don't better the context within which people work? It is your job to create that context. I very proudly, every organization I've been in, including this one, I've spent a lot of time thinking about what are the measures and the policies and the changes that need to be brought in to enable these things. It's why we built Aeon, our software that enables that mutual knowledge piece. It's why, we have these conversations with leaders. So we can go into the specifics, and of course there are different kind of policy changes that can apply to different personal contexts. I don't know that I would single it out for minorities, but maybe for life events, like as Dr. Vinika said, it's not just about male, female, it's about you've become a parent. It's about you've lost someone you care for. It's about you've had a miscarriage, which we've seen Jacinda Ardern kind of enact something around that for both parents, It's about all of those moments where organizations have to create context for a better space, no matter whether your diversity is inherent or it's acquired or it's related to an event. Something happened in your life that has changed how you're feeling today. It is our job to make that environment work for you. So sorry, this is a bit of a passionate kind of answer, but I really think whose job is it then? I don't know. Is it just something we delegate to government and worry about once every 4 years when we vote? No, that's not good enough.
Yeah, we love the passion. Dr. Vinika, you nodding your head, would love to kind of get your thoughts and around some of the ways in which, leaders and if anybody else that you deem, responsible for kind of putting in these policies to address and create more diversity. Would love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, Marilyn will know some of these professors. We have colleagues at INSEAD, Professors Kinyas and Petiglieri, and they talk about this idea of a systemic web of challenges when it comes to the experiences that women have in the workplace. And talking about the fact that it's not any one problem, it's a combination of various different problems, right, which have influenced how things have gone, and whether it's organizational policies and practices or wage gap, various other things. And now, of course, the pandemic has made certain things worse, as we were discussing, this whole idea of, societal pressures to do more when things go wrong, then women in many cultures have to then or in many families have to bear that extra burden. So when we start talking about the solutions, then again, it's not going to be a silver bullet. It's going to be a systemic set of solutions. We'll have to combine various different options and take a nuanced look at what really is required and take it from there. So some general pointers that we always talk about, building a culture of learning, which is important under all circumstances, but especially in the extreme sort of VUCA of this kind of crisis, then that becomes even more important, which means just, looking at what other people are saying, sort of becoming really good listeners. We had some research that we had done early in the onset of the crisis at the Gender Initiative, which again, we spoke with a lot of leaders. We spoke with a lot of alumni, and that included a large percentage of, senior leaders, and asked them, what are you doing? And this is what they were talking about. They said, we're listening better. We're taking a careful and sort of sensitive look at everyone's situation, because, one thing, whether we like it or not, we're all becoming very aware of the home environment of our team members, right? Whether it is, for instance, just before the call started, I was telling you guys about, I'm trying to change my background because I'm sitting in my daughter's flat in London and it's student accommodation and it's not the kind of background I typically want. But the fact is, well, that's how it is right now, right? We're all working from home. We're all having to sort of make all these sorts of changes, and we're becoming aware that not everyone has access to a single room. Someone is a single parent and has little children or pets who might come in, so all of those things. So I think that awareness, that sensitivity has become particularly crucial, and it's good to see leaders, sort of paying attention to that in a way that they've never done in the past, or at least more than they've done in the past, which I think is really something quite good. Even a session like this, where we're talking to each other, we're trying to see what's working in other organizations, is all part of building that culture of learning. Another thing that becomes important is the idea of using data with purpose. Again, which is something that we should always be doing. But one of the silver linings of this crisis is that, we're collecting more data than we've ever done before. And so we do have an opportunity, and it's already been a year and a half. So we can learn this, who are the people who suffered the most at such stages, and what are some of the measures that worked or did not work. And so that is something that becomes very important. Another thing that I think I can mention in this regard is this is actually from research that we did before the crisis. This was at the Emerging Markets Institute, sponsored by a large bank, where we were looking at the fact that many organizations talk about having introduced various measures for diversity, and still the needle is not moving as much as we'd like it to. And so why is that happening? And as a result of the project that followed, 3 things came out. And because we're a business school and we like our jargon, I'm going to put it in AD, SAD, state of affairs. So the S is for lack of specificity, the A is for lack of accountability, and D is for lack of disclosure. So those are the 3 aspects. Now, lack of specificity in sort of what is the specific problem that you're trying to address with this particular bullet that you're sending out, and how specifically measured in terms of its impact. Very important and often gets missed. The second one, in terms of lack of accountability, if heads don't roll when a measure doesn't work, it's unfortunately it doesn't really make it. Firm targets, the little bit of, I think, where Marilyn started with, someone has to be responsible, with you completely on that one, right? And the third one is in terms of lack of disclosure. On diversity stats, so many companies still don't publish those or are uncomfortable with some aspects. So, if you have board nominations, it's not just about who you end up with, who was the head of the nomination committee, how many people, how many women did you consider, all of those things. More disclosures required. So those are the 3 aspects, again, I would think that we need to be correcting, we need to be doing a little more about. And I think that sort of becomes quite important in terms of understanding some things that we can do just to make things go well. One other thing that I would like to mention quickly, which is new, and it's come up, in the context of the pandemic and conversations that we've had since with leaders, is the idea that, as I was saying earlier, the boundaries between work and home, of course, have become blurred. The difference between the first shift and the second shift doesn't exist for most of us now. And what that has also done is, as we said, it's made leaders more aware. We've also understood that often the productivity of people at work now depends more than it has before on the home environment. And this is true for men and women, for all genders really, but if you're fortunate enough to have a family or a spouse or a partner who understands the importance of your job, given that, well, they might lose theirs, who knows what's happening, but just generally, and is supportive, then you're starting your work with a gender balance that has its foundation in the house. And that extends to productivity in the workplace more than perhaps it would have done, if these 2 sort of aspects were so separated. And that's become very important. And again, this is not something that I'm saying. It's come out of conversations with many, executives, and some of them had very interesting ideas in terms of how it's become more and more important for leaders to understand these home dynamics, to be aware of them, and so to work accordingly. So the importance of sort of having both, I think, in the workplace to have your colleagues and your bosses be supportive, and a combination of at home to have supportive partners and families together. Then this might lead to a situation where we don't have to worry too much about so many years of hard work towards gender balance being shunted back because of this pandemic.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much. There's so much to unpack there, and I feel like we could spend so much more time. Thank you so much for those insights, Vinika. You said something about spouses and the support coming from home. I think just to say that at Cosmic Centaurs, we always give a shout out to the spouses of Centaurs who are always supporting us. They're really even in for the week of this conference. And so really echoing what you said there, thank you. I have so much I'd love to ask you, but unfortunately we have to run into our rapid fire and closing questions. So this is just a fun kind of closer to our sessions. We're asking all of our panelists to give us quick rapid fire answers for these. And so I'll start with you, Vinika, then Marilyn, and you, and Marilyn, we'll keep going. So please complete this sentence. The skill every leader needs to have today that they didn't have before is?
understanding camera angles, I think, has become very
It's a good one.
right?
It's a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that one has never thought about before. And then, you're being wrapped on the knuckles every time by people who say, oh, look at this. But seriously, I think body language and how it comes through over the camera becomes very important. You can some just seem more aggressive than you intended to be just because that's how it's looking on camera. So that, and then perhaps I'd quickly add also, as we were saying, take a more sensitive and nuanced look at people's personal situations when you're fixing meetings, etc. Sorry, that was longer than one fill in the blank. So
it's all right. We could listen to you for a really long time. Thank you so much. Marilyn, what about you? What's the one skill that leaders need to have today that they didn't have before?
I think it's facilitation. Being able to facilitate workshops, conversations, coaching sessions in ways that they never had to do before, and online in particular.
Yeah. Dr. Vinika, what is the one book every leader needs to read?
That is the most difficult question I've ever, because there are so many that come to mind immediately. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat a little bit and give you 2 names of books that leaders must definitely read. And these are new. They're from colleagues that I know, and the books are fantastic. So let me mention 2 new ones. So there's one called No Rules Rules, which is about Netflix, the culture of Netflix, which is written by Erin Meyer and, of course, Reed Hastings himself. Very interesting. So I think that's something that's really exciting and worth reading. The other one is called The Phoenix Encounter, which tells you about managing your business as if the business is on fire, which I think under current circumstances everybody will understand. And that's by Professors Paddy Padmanabhan and Samir Hasija and Ian Woodward. So yeah, those are the 2 I'd talk about right now.
Thank you so much for those. Marilyn, what about you?
I hate this because you know that I have an attachment to many, many books.
And
I didn't have time to prepare. And I kept thinking about this, and I'm like, every book I think about is written by a white guy. Here we go. I was trying to find one, but maybe later in the comments. But honestly, Range is definitely one that I recommend. I spoke about it earlier. And the second one that, honestly, this is my honest answer because I've always given it to people on my team when they've reached a stage where they're going from being an individual contributor to leading a team. And it's a book called High Output Management by Andrew Grove.
Good one. Vinika, the perfect song to work to is?
Yes, so I'm old-fashioned like that. I like my, old movie themes, classic movie themes, Dr. Zhivago, Lara's song, etc. But I think under current circumstances, I've also started to again enjoy "Don't Worry, Be Happy." Sometimes that says it all, and it's an interesting question you're asking because now when we do some of our team meetings, we play these songs that different people from the team choose, and then we all have to guess who it is. And so those will come to mind.
Incredible.
And mine, as you very well know, Tala, is the Homecoming album by Beyonce. That is my working track.
Absolutely. That playlist keeps us going. The perfect team size is? Dr. Vinika?
So that one, I think, again, picking a number, I always worry about. I know there are different ideas from 5 to 8, etc. But I think everything's changing so much now in the virtual world. So I would say that, a number that allows each person's voice to be heard while sort of bringing together the synergies well. And that really changes in different situations. And so especially in today's virtual world, because one thing that's become useful is that voices can be heard in multiple ways. You can send in something on the chat box if you don't like to raise your hand, and it becomes more manageable. So yeah, as long as every member's voice can be heard, that's the perfect team size in that environment.
Lovely.
I'm going to give you a cheeky answer. Mine is more than 1, less than however many names I can remember. So if I can remember 150, that can be a team. I'm okay with that. And more than 1, because less than that, then you're alone, or there's no one in the room.
I'll take it. And then the last question: the future of teams is?
Yeah, that one is easy. The future of teams is agility, innovation, and mutual respect. Because we know that the way teams are created, the way they are, the length of time for which they work, how quickly they're disbanded, where they might come from, multicultural, multinational, multi-generational, agility, innovation, and mutual trust are going to be the 3 factors that's the future of things.
And Marilyn?
For me, I'm going to take a page out of Joe, who's going to be on our panel in a minute. Last year, we asked him what the future of work was, and he said work. And so the future of teams is teams. Teams are complex, they're dynamic, they change, they are online sometimes and not at others. They're smaller, they're big. I think it's about maintaining the understanding of what teams are for, when they're useful, what context they're in, and making sure that you nurture and nourish them so they can do their best work.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you both for your time and your insights today. We learned so much. You know, some of the things we talked about are really going to, I'm sure, have a lasting effect on myself and all the attendees. Mutual respect, acquired diversity, having a sad state of affairs. These are all really remarkable takeaways. And so, Vinika, Marilyn, thank you so much for joining us today. Up next, we have our closing debate. So I look forward to seeing you all there. We are going to be debating whether remote teams are better. And we have 3 remarkable panelists. So thank you all for your time, and we look forward to seeing you on the other side.
Thank you.